Hello, my name's Adam Spring, and this is a Remotely Interested podcast, hosted at remotely-interested.com. My guest for this episode is Ruscetta, a videographer based out of Georgia in the US. Now, Aaron's story is an interesting one because it is one of community learning, and it is one of community learning based around a series of computers called the Amiga. The Amiga in the US was known for democratizing the video industry. In the UK, it also fed into a series of bedroom developers, people who, in the 1980s, were encouraged via computers like the Spectrum and the Acorn to make their own games, to make their own software, and to interact with technologies in a way where, maybe today we don't do it so much. We do have things now like the Raspberry Pis and stuff like that, but they build upon that generational culture that was started way back when. If you want to know a little bit more about the Amiga, then go to my website and look at some of the blog posts that I've done. Otherwise, for now, I will leave it to Aaron, and I will speak to you again at the end of the episode.
Oh, where to start? I worked in television in the video profession. Worked early on apprenticing at a television station in Salt Lake City, and worked my way up from fixing lights and building sets to running camera, and on up through various ranks of or various different positions in the industry, until I was eventually a director. I took the approach that if you're going to be a director, you got to understand everything underneath you that you're actually calling the shots for. But that aside, I was working in high-end post-production, and I heard about this computer that came along that was video compatible, and that opened up the doorway for me to affordably play with and experiment with video art and video production on a home kind of basis. So I was immediately attracted to the machine, and I dove in very quickly with bought my first machine in '87. I bought one of the 2000s. I waited till the second generation came out, something that was more expandable and not quite as tricky to run. And when I bought my 2000, I immediately got into Sculpt 3D and playing with that, and got into the Genlocks, because now I had my own personal character generator, and I could and an overlay tool, and I dove into Amiga Atlanta, the local user group, because I was a community that I could learn from. And so I learned everything I kind of know about computers from that. I did not have any formal education coming into it. But I'm a techie. I'm fascinated by technology. And it was right up my alley to just take that Amiga and run with it and learn everything I could about it. And fortunately, it was such a sophisticated machine, and it was so groundbreaking in the things that it brought to the computer, desktop computing, that my knowledge became quite deep, I think.
So some of the conversations we had prior to this interview, you mentioned that you've seen the computer as having three main prongs. Mm-hmm. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, the Amiga came on the scene in 1985. That's also the year that the Free Software Foundation was established, when Richard Stallman started reprogramming Unix tools in a clean environment, where it was free from the licensing that was inhibiting his use of computer technology. And so one of the strongest prongs that I think the Amiga had an advantage in was in the operating system. It was a true multitasking, priority preemptive, message-based operating system that had a lot of similarities to Unix, the main computing environment of the time. And along with that burgeoning free software thinking, you had a lot of incredible programs come out for it. So that's prong one, is the operating system, and the strengths that did, and the opportunities it gave for all the people who were interested in hacking and writing free software programs of the time. Second prong was I think certainly the gaming, because it was a first true multitasking, priority preemptive, machine. The hardware design of using multiple processors really opened it up to be the first multimedia machine. So you could do sound and have the sound operating independently of the clocks of the video and independently of the input and output because of the multiprocessor design. So gaming was definitely a big strength of the machine. It was the first one that was really had the kind of capabilities to support what you need to do a game, and then of course the video compatibility, and along with my 2000 computer eventually got a video toaster put in it because it was a rather groundbreaking video machine because it made home video production a much more real proposition because of the price point. And so I've used the video toaster in professional environments. I used it in '96 to edit videos for the Paralympics presentations. Even though I was in a highly sophisticated video environment at the time, it allowed me. I insisted on on being allowed to do it with my toaster flyer system because of the nature of the project. Doing the interstitials in these pieces just led itself to that tool, and so I was able to haul my Amiga into the studio and use it to do all the editing for the Paralympics videos.
Okay, and so this is an interesting one because obviously you can tell I'm from the UK and Europe. Gaming was very much a thing with the Amigas. The video toaster wasn't. We knew of it, but it wasn't really used because it was mainly NTSC. So how much involvement did you have with the Atlanta Olympics using an Amiga? And also, can you talk more about the impact of the video culture and how the Amiga helped change that?
Well, actually, when you talk about the Olympics, there's a great story because the '96 Olympics, of course, were here in Atlanta, and there was a lot of competition amongst the various cities to get the Olympics, win the Olympic bid, and there was a group at Georgia Tech. I wish I could remember the name of the head of that, but he was an Amiga 500 fan. He knew it, yeah, and he knew the Amiga capabilities. And again, because it was such a groundbreaking machine and so media oriented, he used it as the center for controlling a whole multimedia presentation system. That involved 3 synchronized video projectors, audio tracks synced to that with dozens of languages on them, and a presentation selector that was actually a 3D translucent model that was highlighted from the background and such. And all of this was coordinated by an Amiga 2000. And I remember the programmer's name. The programmer's name was Toder Fay, who wrote a rather incredible audio program called Bars and Pipes that was very popular for the Amiga as well. But he got the whole thing synced up and running. The only other computer part in the system was a Macintosh, and the Macintosh was used for its to backlight the 3D translucent model. And of course, the biggest failing, the biggest fight that Amiga ever had to do was getting proper PR and promotion and proper marketing done for it. And so all the press was said that the whole thing was done by a Macintosh. The Macintosh was a dummy projector, and the Amiga was running the whole show. But because of the way the marketroids rigged it, and the way the mainstream media, rigged it, the Amiga was never recognized for actually winning the Olympic bid here, because that whole multimedia presentation showed that we had the technical capabilities to pull this off for the Olympic Committee.
Yeah, so it could have been the mother of all demos.
It could have been the mother of all demos. Is that it was used to create and present the Olympic bid, and it won the Olympics for our city.
So I guess like I said before, I'd like to know more about the impact on the video community in the US that the Amiga had. And also I think it would be useful to, as somebody that was in the scene at the time, if you could talk about the Amiga landscape, so where the main clubs were, who was doing what, people like Fred Fish and their impact, sort of stuff like that.
Fred Fish was part of that prong number one, that operating system, that Unix-like operating system. And so Fred Fish was from that Unix environment, and he was fascinated by the programming possibilities for working with the Amiga. And he took it on himself to just kind of collect the work of his associates, his friends, people he knew in the free software community that were writing programs and releasing the source code for those programs so that other people could learn from them. So he saw it as a great tool to expand, I think, putting words in his mouth, but I think he saw it as a great tool to expand the whole programming, learning, and education environment. And so he produced over 1,000 floppy disks worth of software. One of the few things I retained from the Amiga 30th convention was I made sure I hung onto my Fred Fish disks. Yeah, so I still got all that CD software up there. As far as the user groups go, these different communities came together very strongly around the Amiga, the gamers, but especially the video community here. And again, I served as the Vidiot savant of Amiga Atlanta for most of my tenure with the group, as well as serving as the president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and ad infinitum.
So you're the Renaissance man, really.
Well, no, just I learned everything I understood about computing. And this whole landscape opened up to me from my involvement with the user group. And I've always been a very strong believer that no one is self-educated. Everybody is community educated. Yeah. Even if you're off in a closet reading a book, somebody wrote the darn book that you're studying with. Yeah, so in that tone, I always felt very strongly that I needed to give back to those communities. And so I took on those leadership roles and devoted the time to make the Amiga user group a more viable or more helpful and useful community for people. And that's why I served in all those different positions.
So who made up the Atlanta Amiga user group?
Well, the most notable name is probably Joe Torre. He was very active. The original group was a small cadre of computer science students at Georgia Tech.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Ron Heimbigner is one name that comes to mind. There are others. I should have them written down to share with you, actually. But there were a few very strong players, and they were just hardcore dedicated to that. They saw it as a great tool that helped them learn in that community, and so they created the community to expand that learning. And they initialized the club. Joe Torre was an early member, great hacker, and just really understood electronics, largely community educated himself, though he would say self-educated. But yeah, but he was an early driving force, and later he actually was hired by Gateway when the Amiga was in transition after its demise, after Commodore's demise. He actually was hired by Gateway for a while to try and get their tech off the ground with a revised vision of the Amiga. And but that core group kind of held together, and then we had lots of other volunteers over the years that were really great. Had interesting projects. One of the early projects was a ray tracing project where they actually modeled things by numbers and for Epic. It was called the Epic Ray Project, and then they the club got together and a few of the guys generated 3D models based just entirely lists of numbers for points in space, and it had the AAI logo and a some kind of bouncing object. I think it was a bouncing ball, mirror ball, because it was ray trace, of course. And then you did a 3D fly around of the logo with a anyway, with all the colors and everything. But the point was that they, at the time, each frame was taking, several days to render. But they distributed it, and eventually we assembled the Amiga Epic Ray video. I was able to help with the final editing process of getting all these single frames that had been recorded onto floppy disks actually onto video in a reasonable quality state. And,
oh my God.
But it was like a 5-second fly around, but it took a couple of years to get everybody to do the distributed rendering by SneakerNet on floppies. But that was great. That was one project. Bob Castro was a member of the club. Again, served in a lot of officer positions. But he came from the video realm as well. He came from Georgia. I won't say Georgia State, but it's not. Came from University of Georgia in Athens, where he was working in video there, and he did some interesting stuff using the high-end video equipment he had there. He used early on with an Amiga 1000. He used a professional video camera to do some captures with just not the frame grabber, the DigiView.
Oh, okay.
Okay, he did a DigiView scan, and the DigiView scan that you see of the model with the red scarf wrapped around her face, that was a Bob Castro scan.
Oh wow.
Yeah, he did that way back when at UGA, and but he also at one point they were doing a project with an early version before it was called Lightwave. What was it? I can't recall exactly what it was originally called, but the precursor to Lightwave, and you had to model by numbers, and so he put out all the points modeling the entire iconic central building of the Georgia State campus, the historical landmark building, and with a big clock tower and spire and everything, and he modeled that in and animated that with a very early version of Lightwave.
Wow,
yeah,
incredible.
yeah, and and did a fly around, and it was actually used by the university as part of their promotions. It wasn't a ray trace, so it didn't take quite so forever to render, but but it was a major project. And he later on he was very involved. He was very much or still is very much a fan of the space program. And so he did a couple other little documentary pieces, like the way NASA used the Amigas, banks and banks of Amigas, to track telemetry for certain rocket launches.
Which is actually on YouTube as of 2015 when we did this interview. So
yeah, exactly. You can go see that. Yeah, it was, and he also had done a fair amount of documentation of the space program and such as kind of a sideline, but he uses his Amigas as a tool in doing that throughout. To, if nothing else, to log footage and do offline cuts and things like that back in the good old days of analog video editing when real men video edited. Real men like me.
So, yeah. Anyway, on that note.
Yeah.
So one thing that's kind of coming out here is that basically the university scene in the Atlanta area, because there are a lot of universities in this area, it fed directly into the Amiga community. Then I find that quite interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if it was the case as much in other cities. Of course, in Silicon Valley, you had a lot of professional community there that could draw on it. But the big thing here was with the universities was the club was started through the technical university, Georgia Tech, and it lent a certain credibility to it.
Yeah.
Outside that, and it also gave us facilities. I mean, we met for years and years and years on the Georgia Tech campus, and we had a nice amphitheater room, and the early guys had figured out how to hack into the projection system, so we could use the projector for our meetings. And I don't think they ever got official sanction to actually be using the room. One of the early members was also in the chemistry department, so we used to meet in a chemistry building classroom, and but he left early on and graduated and moved on. Yeah. But they kept using the room and nobody ever complained. So we were kind of there by accident almost.
Yeah. Seek forgiveness instead of ask permission, and if they don't ask about permission, don't worry about it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
but it was great. But it provided a great facility for us. We often had attendance of 150 people, maybe even 200 people in that amphitheater for meetings. All of them interested in some aspect of it, but again, a lot of video community was there. Maybe that's because I'm a video guy myself, so I saw a lot of that connection. But video computer science students, people who wanted to learn programming, or were fascinated by the technology, they just touched on so many different bases and brought them together.
So, I mean, in terms of user interaction then, what would you say was the sort of key thing or the unique thing about the Amiga? Because obviously it's something over the years that's been hacked, they've been, modified and accelerated and things like that. What would you say was the key thing from the user interaction viewpoint that drew these people to it?
Well, I can't say what drew, everybody's interests were different. So I can't really speak to, I think the diversity of interests that got brought together was a real strength. Yeah. Having those three different prongs there, to really, different angles from which it was tracked. So it kind of, created a symbiosis where these people were exchanging ideas and things like that. So I could do a hack. If I'm a programmer, I can do a hack that will help a video guy. A video guy can make a promo to promote my software, that kind of thing. You end up with these kind of little symbiotic connections. In any good community is going to be diverse. And so it brought a lot of diversity of community around the Amiga. Can you repeat the question?
So basically, I was thinking more along the lines of user interaction.
Well, that as far as the community goes, definitely the user interaction was built on that diversity.
Yeah.
To the largest degree, but individually, different people come to it different ways. Personally, for me, I had come from the Commodore 64, and I used to hack around and play with Commodore 64s before I moved on to the Amiga, and so I learned a little bit of basic programming and got some background in the computers, I guess, before the Amiga was there. But it gave me enough knowledge to understand that, wow, this is really an exceptional system, and to get me more involved with it. But all the Commodore 64 stuff was, it was text based and everything. So I got a hold of my Amiga, and one of the reasons I sought out the Amiga user group was, man, what is this GUI thing? What is a mouse? What do these icons do? Just working through that first basic exposure to this whole new concept of a graphic user interface was like, it was frustrating me to no end. Because it didn't connect. There was no previous kind of example of what that was, and it's part of the brilliance of Steve Jobs' Marketroid mentality. That he did a one button mouse and kept it as simple as possible for people. Of course, user friendly quickly became user handicapping in that environment, but which is why I love the Amiga, because you could hack it, you could run it the way you wanted to. And early on, I even explored some of the software where they tried to replace the entire workbench system. There were a couple of hackers in Canada that created a product that was basically a total GUI replacement for it. It didn't work very well. It was buggy as hell. I quickly went back to the workbench, but it was interesting to see people trying to do that anyway. But so everybody comes at it from their own interests, and bailiwick. It was definitely worth learning, getting past that learning curve. But again, that's one of the things that drove me to the community was that what's this whole interface thing? I don't.
And do you think that the GUI fed in with the idea of creative computing as well?
Yeah, well, the word is graphic user interface, and the graphics of the machine were far superior to anything else at the time, as far as the capabilities go, with the multiprocessor environment, 4,000 colors and animation, all those things, and coming from the video side of it, graphics was my bailiwick too, because I mean, as a high-end video editor, which is what I was doing when I came into the Amiga, we had character generators and graphics generators and digital effects machines in the analog world that were pretty well reproduced by the Amiga's capabilities. So part of my job was being an effects and graphics designer in just about every session I sat in on. So I took that to the Amiga very quickly. And the coolest thing about my Amiga experience, though, was that I got to teach at an art college, the Atlanta College of Art, a fairly renowned, nationally renowned art college. But again, the Amiga's exceptional capabilities made it, and affordability, made it possible for them to start one of the first electronic arts programs in the country.
Oh, wow, okay.
And one of the friends who had kind of introduced me to the Amiga from the video aspect of it was an instructor there, an adjunct instructor. And he was having to move on from it, and so he tapped me to come in and try and see if I could replace him. And so we had a lab with several Amiga 1000s, mostly working with deluxe paint and stuff. And these were all tools that I was very familiar with. So around 1989, maybe early 90, I went in and applied. And unfortunately, whatever, but my life path has never allowed me to pursue any higher education. So I'm going in there with my high school diploma to teach a computer class.
Yeah.
But it's an art college, so there's some leeway. But because I knew the machine, because I knew the technology that they were using and the software they were using, I ended up getting the job and working there as an adjunct, and it was very rewarding stuff. Because at the time, there was a whole world out there that didn't understand a GUI. Yeah. Most of these students in the early days through the early 90s were totally clueless as to where to start, and it was a great thing to be able to introduce them to the whole whole world of potential that was there with electronic graphics, and the Amiga's graphics capabilities made that possible. And I worked there for several years, as they expanded the program. We started getting into 3D modeling and animation as well. And I ended up programming a network to feed a rendering machine, a Raptor, from the various Amigas that were there. It was a great position to be in. And I really missed it. But eventually, of course, after Amiga or Commodore went out of business, they needed to move that lab on to other capabilities. So I filtered out of that when they brought in a more experienced educator to run the electronic arts program there. Yeah, it was among the best. At the same time, on the video side of it, I got to run into a lot of artists. Video art it made electronic video art, electronic and video art, graphics art, much more accessible. And so, one of the things that I was involved with is we would ran into a group, a local artists local very well respected artists who like to experiment and on the forefront of stuff. He was heavily into the Amiga, and he loved it for his artwork, and he created a lot of interesting multimedia presentations, including like a chair that you could swivel on that would actually track which direction you were looking with a monitor and an Amiga hooked up, so you could kind of get a 3D panoramic view through this little chair that you would sit in. Yeah, cool. Yeah, and he's still doing that kind of thing, but he was there, and he made arrangements and made connections with the local community TV station, the public access channel on the cable, and to go in and do broadcast video art on Saturday afternoons. And he got a friend of his named Clark Vreeland, who would track live music to it. He was a very capable musician, guitar, drums, you name it, he could play it, and play it well. And he would come in and track to it. And again, the friend who introduced me to the Atlanta College of Art was also involved with the project, and he brought me in, and I would literally rewire their entire control room studio with a little vision mixer and cameras and everything. I would rewire it so that we could sync together about a half dozen or so Amigas, all run through Genlocks, the entire system, because I didn't have money for things like delay lines and such, or all the stuff you needed to run a TV studio, an analog TV studio. I actually did the timing by very carefully measuring the cables in between the in between the various Amigas, and so that I matched the cable lengths on all the video loops, so that and cut cables to do that, so that I knew exactly how long it was between Genlock A and Genlock B, and could sync it all into the switcher off one sync point.
Sounds like tomorrow never knows.
Yeah. But it was great for about a year and a half. Every other week we'd be in there on a Saturday afternoon, and we were broadcasting 3 hours of abstract video wallpaper, tracked to live music, and I've got hours and hours and hours of this recorded.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. So what would you say, talking about this creative process, what would you say the computer interaction for sort of creative people was like before the Amiga came along? Obviously, you mentioned the Commodore 64, the text-based stuff. How would you describe that sort of how the Amiga changed things along those lines?
It was purely, in my view, I think it was just a matter of affordability for the capabilities that you had. You had capabilities that started to approach the realm where high-end television, where it's hundreds of thousands of dollars equipment, all generally commercially controlled, and you started to have the kind of capabilities on the desktop that on this affordable equipment that met or surpassed that really high-end expensive equipment and those kinds of tools. And that accessibility more than anything else was the driver, and opened up creative possibilities that were pretty much endless. I think Atlanta College of Art actually learned about the Amiga and the possibilities because they saw Andy Warhol painting with it, and when the machine was introduced at the grand at the grand unveiling.
So that did have an impact then.
Oh yes, it definitely did. It brought awareness to that whole arts community, and to some extent with Deborah Harry there too, doing the music community too, that kind of capability. Most of the computers at the time, there had computer technology back then, including the Commodore 64, had started to open up creativity in the music world with the whole MIDI interface, a standardized common interface, like IP is, IP protocols. It's standardized computer interface that allowed people to connect their equipment together from different manufacturers and record their musical creations in a digital repeatable form, and to explore that. So a lot of the creative people that I knew were there from the Commodore 64 thing. I had friends who tracked professional music, a guy named James Oliverio, and his entire studio was run with Commodore 64s and Dr. T's sequencers and things like that. And so MIDI kind of opened it up. In fact, when I went to buy an Amiga, I was actually balancing it against the Atari ST, because I was a little bit ignorant and I didn't understand how simple MIDI really was. But the Atari ST had MIDI connectors on it, right? And that was one of the areas that I first started exploring creative stuff, was buying a MIDI keyboard and plugging it into my Commodore 64 through an interface and tinkering with that. So it was a big interest. And now suddenly with the Amiga, you had the visual side of that. So now it wasn't just your ears. You can do it with your eyes, and you can get that graphics power and that animation capability and that multimedia sequencing capability to come together and open up a whole brand new set of creative avenues.
Okay. Now, you mentioned, obviously, the Commodore 64 quite a bit. Now, when you were buying your Amiga, did the fact that it was linked to Commodore have any influence on your purchase of the hardware, or not really?
Not really. It was more specifically the capabilities of the machines, definitely. And what I saw is their video compatibility. Again, big seller for me. The Commodore name was not there. It was not an influence to me. Yeah.
Okay. And did it feel like a Commodore product?
No, not at all. No, not coming from a Commodore 64. The whole Amiga was a radically different machine. It came from a whole different development process, a whole new creative group. Many of the creative group I've gotten to know. One of the cool things that Amiga Atlanta did is we had a president at the time named Lamar Morgan, and we called him Lamar the Relentless, because he was not a very creatively capable kind of guy. But he just loved the Amiga and loved the potential. He was so excited about it. He actually worked in the financial industry, so he's kind of straight arrow, But he loved the Amiga to the point where he wanted to be president of the club and help organize it. And he was a great organizer. He used his strengths real well. But we called him Lamar the Relentless, because once he got the names and numbers of the original inventors, mostly through Joe Torre, he got on the phone and had this grandiose scheme of having an Amiga 10th anniversary. Now, we were a little bit late. We did it in early 96. It should have been 95. But by the time we got all the energies together to make it happen, that's when we were able to pull it off. But we did build it as a Amiga 10th anniversary show, and Lamar kept hounding all the original programmers and such to come and share with us, and we put together quite an amazing convention as a group. It was a real high point of the whole Amiga Atlanta history. To get we had 300 attendees. We got Dale Luck and Carl Sassenrath and Tim Jennison and all these luminaries from the original group and from the community to show up. He actually got Stuart Chaffee to host. Now it turns out Stuart Chaffee may not be a name you know, but Stuart Chaffee ran a program called Computer Chronicles. Yep. From the early 80s on PBS up until the end of the 90s.
Around about 2003.
2003?
Because a lot of them are on YouTube now.
So it was like 20 years this guy did that. But Stuart Chaffee, who appreciated computers, of course, really, really appreciated the Amiga. And he thought it was just the best things in sliced bread. So in his program, even though Amiga didn't have the marketing and commercial push that the other brands enjoyed, he frequently highlighted it on his program, and he brought clips of various Amiga presentations over the years when he came to the show. But he actually hosted our 10th anniversary event and was thrilled to do so. Lamar got some local coverage out of CNN, got the governor to make a declaration of Amiga Computer Day in the state.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was just, it was by the time I got to the Amiga 30th convention, it was old hat. I'd been there, done that before.
20 years earlier.
20 years earlier, and actually organized. Organized. It was an incredible feat to pull off. But I think it was very appreciated by all the community.
Well, I think it's interesting as well because obviously, Commodore went bust 94 and you're still doing this in 96.
Yes.
So I find that very interesting as well.
Yeah. Well, the timeline is actually Commodore was on its way out in 93. I got to attend, Joe Torre got me to be, or showed me how to sign up to be a developer, an Amiga developer. And even though I was never much of a serious programmer, I loved the technology and I loved learning about it. And so I went to a couple of developer conferences. In 1990, the Amiga Developer Conference was actually in Atlanta, and Bob Castro and I prepared a couple of videos for that that we distributed there. Just basically highlight a big Amiga promo piece. I should probably put that online because it was kind of well done. We used all our professional video equipment that we had access to where we both worked together, and put together a very nice little demo of Amiga software and Amiga features. Just a little music video piece, but I should dig it up and see if I can get a clean copy off the videotapes that I have before they all fall apart.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what are your memories and stories of the years after Commodore went bust?
Oh, I remember everybody really being anxious to see a new Commodore, not a new Commodore, see a new Amiga, and see somebody pick up that technology and run with it. And so there was a lot of flag waving that went on for several years, not just our convention, but elsewhere. We wanted to see it happen. I remember a special amount of excitement when Gateway picked it up because it was something local, it was something U.S. They were a successful PC manufacturer, PC assembler. They had a name, they had storefronts, so there was a real optimism with that, and the head of Gateway. In his messages that I saw at Amiga conventions like in St. Louis and stuff, seemed to kind of get the idea, and his biggest complaint was that the Amiga just kind of worked. You just turn it on and you're up and running. Mm-hmm. Even though that was Mac's claim to fame, it wasn't necessarily true with the Mac. Yeah. But with the Amiga, it was very much, boom, I want to run a game. And well, you got to do this, you got to install that, you got to get past the DRM, you got to get to, No, I just want to play a game with my kids. And when I went to do that on the PC, it was like I wasted hours and we didn't ever get to play the game. Yeah. And when I did it with an Amiga, it was like I plugged it in there and we had a game on the TV screen. Let's go, Yep. Yeah. So he seemed to get it, but I knowing Joe, being a close friend of Joe's, and knowing and talking to him about his time at Gateway, I kind of understand they weren't really willing to put the full weight of it behind. We had a great convention though. It may have been. I'm pretty sure it was it was the St. Louis convention. Not only was the head of Gateway there, but there was a couple other. The head of their technology department who had been put in charge of the Amiga, and he was a very flamboyant, more as much a a marketing personality as a technical guy, but he was just all excited about pushing the Amiga, and but he floundered and kind of fell by the wrong side of the head of Gateway, and so. I'm glad I can't remember the names because I shouldn't be telling this story. But something in his personal activities really turned him off to the head of Gateway, and he was part of the reason I think that the Gateway program collapsed. The guy who was tagged to head up the effort kind of fell by the wayside.
Wow! And what year was this?
This would have been in the neighborhood of 96 and 97.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, it probably would have been more 97, 98.
Yeah, yeah. I'd have to look back, and I went to so many Amiga conventions, it's hard to filter them in my head anymore.
Yeah.
Pretty sure that was the St. Louis convention that happened later on, when there was a lot of energy to try and revive it.
So how many conventions did you go to overall then?
Oh, let's see. Well, including the 2 developers conferences that I went to, I probably did 5 or 6 conventions, but at least once a year I was going off to one convention or another. Oh, wow. Cincinnati, again, St. Louis. Trying to remember where they all were. Most all of them involved some kind of road trip, and we had a small cadre of people that would go off to those things. Robert Hamilton is a Amiga a graphics artist and art teacher at Spelman College here in Georgia, and he made these great T-shirts and stuff. And so he'd be in the van with his boxes of Amiga T-shirts, going off to the conventions. And a guy who worked doing computer repair, was just an avid. Well, I actually did copier repair, but. He was great to have along. He was a karate fan, so every time we drive by the old Waffle House, he was Waffle House. Give us the Bruce Lee version.
I remember that one, driving a load of Amigas to the Amiga 30 conference. But yeah,
Waffle House. But that's where that originated. It was traveling with him. Joe Torre would sometimes be with us. But we had a small cadre. Pop in a van. Rick Longenecker went along a couple times, and we get off to these Amiga conventions just to have a grand old time. I am an organizer, and so I would organize a party, and I became rather infamous at a couple of conventions for having the party room.
Yeah, what was the number of that again?
I'm pretty sure it's 104.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I would try to get room 104. Yeah, on the first floor in a corner where you're not you don't have too many neighbors, and then and that's where we'd have the Amiga parties, the after hours time.
Well, there we go.
Yeah, I have to mull it over for a while to remember all the places and conventions that we did. But there was always interesting characters there. There was the character who drove the DeLorean, who was promising to revive a lot of Amiga technology, and was going to hire Dave Haney, and and he claimed to have all this family money to do this and everything, and was just going to throw money at it, and drove a DeLorean. But he was a big self-promoter, and it turned out that everything about him was pretty much a fraud.
Well, didn't you say that his mother was involved in the previous account of the story that you gave?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. His mother was there, and she had kind of this princess or royalty kind of air about her, that she was she was some kind of duke or duchess from somewhere, and
oh yeah, oh she was a duke. It was his dad, but
yeah, it was but she was some kind of duchess or princess from some tiny European aristocracy.
Oh yeah, Arkansas, somewhere like that. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. But he snowed Dave Haney, and Dave Haney tried to get involved with him for a little while, but quickly the fraud of it became apparent. So, but he was going to have Dave Haney to help him develop the next Amiga, and was going to put it out there. But it was pie in the kind of stuff. But a lot of people were ready to back anything, any opportunity to keep this wonderful creative tool going.
And how long were you using your Amigas after you kind of knew that there wasn't going to be anything new in the way that you wanted it to be?
Well, actually, the video toaster developed quite an intense community around it because of AREX and the AREX control of it. AREX was one of the things that really kept me with Amiga forever. I really loved to program in AREX. I could do all kinds of utilities for my software in AREX. William Hawes is a god, though you can't find him anymore. Apparently Commodore, the company, screwed him over very badly with his contract for that communications language that opened up all kinds of capabilities for all these different creative tools to talk to each other. and to be able to control them and automate them and things like that. AREX was critical to the whole. I know AREX was critical to the whole Olympics presentation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And in fact, my nickname is AREX Aaron. Spelled with two A's, though, of course.
So for anybody that's not in the Amiga community, explain AREX.
AREX is a port of a Unix interprocess communication language called REX. It was used very heavily in the banking industry, in the Unix number cruncher machines and stuff, and allowed you to talk to and control different programs. It's kind of like middleware almost. It's kind of like a communication channel outside of networking on individual systems. William Hawes did a port of the basic structure of it to the Amiga because he had a true multitasking message-based priority preemptive operating system. He created a way for any programmer, anybody writing a commercial program or a non-commercial program, any kind of program, to put a simple communications port on there, basically give it a telephone line. And then using the AREX engine, AREX programming language, you could control the communications flowing back and forth between the different applications on the system. Okay. So most programs allowed you to write macros in that. My favorite, Cygnus Ed text editor. I wrote all kinds of great macros in AREX because that was the port that they used to tell, to send communications to it. So you'd have your program and you'd have your AREX port, and within your program you'd have certain messages that were recognized through the AREX port, like, draw left 20, simple instructions. And AREX would send those instructions from a program to there, so you could automate things like drawing a graph on a screen on Deluxe Paint with with AREX. Though I don't recall if Deluxe Paint ever really put a proper AREX port on. I shouldn't have said that way, but you get the idea. I know that there were programs that did have AREX ports that would allow you to draw graphics programmatically and things like that. So just an incredible power, and I really, really enjoyed it. Again, huge learning curve. I didn't really understand what the power of this was initially, and it took me a while to kind of wrap my head around the way it worked. Yeah. But once I did, I had a lot of fun with it. And but anyway, I started off by talking about the toaster community being really huge. And very active, and it was such a successful product. There were thousands of them out there. There was market for it, and a bunch of third parties got on board with it. Tim Jinnison was very open about third party support of the thing of the technology, and so even after Commodore folded, there were thousands of toasters out there and people who were using them still, and were going to use them for a number of years hence. So there was a particularly strong small group of third-party programmers who wrote extensions for it. And a lot of those extensions were done just with AREX. And when I learned that he's just using AREX, I can do AREX. And so I actually ended up developing some products for the video toaster market in the late 90s, 5 years after Commodore's out of business. Wow. It wasn't a very brilliant move. It wasn't a good business plan, a good business model, but it was what I loved, and my passion for it made it a lot of fun. And so one of the things the Amiga toaster was lacking that I saw in more modern, Johnny-come-lately video, high-end nonlinear editing systems was a way to get your media in. And at the time, most of your media was still on videotape, and so everybody had their own kind of methods worked out. The hard drives were expensive though, so you couldn't just put your project on a hard drive and then put the hard drive away. Though there was one developer who actually did his work that way. He'd buy these expensive hard drives, format them for the flyer, and take it and put them on the shelf in case the client ever called back with changes.
Well,
But yeah, well, that's dedication. But it was but he was also working at a level that he could charge the kind of price to just enroll that into his costs. But that aside, I went and pursued that, and I was interested in machine control. So I wrote I had a friend of mine, an early Amiga developer named Mark Adams, and he wrote Cyclops and as one of the first Amiga 1000 games, and he developed a couple of other interesting things, an infrared interface to use the Amiga to control infrared devices, and it could read the control codes in, and you could basically turn your Amiga into any kind of infrared controller you wanted it to be. He wrote the Mind Light. He created the Mind Light, which is a hardware-software combination that allowed you to basically do visualizations of music directly on the Amiga screen of live music as it was coming in.
Oh, wow.
So really, really, really a genius. Both he was an electronics professional, and then the software came naturally to him. But he was a friend of mine through the Amiga community here, and my big nail with trying to get my product to work was I needed a simple methodology of getting my AREX commands to a serial port. Okay, and he wrote a little tiny program for me. I mean, it couldn't have been more than 20 lines.
Wow.
It could have been more than 20 lines, but it was called CRX. And I helped him, I told him the specification of the design I wanted. I needed a wraparound buffer because I needed to be able to take the information coming in very quickly from these machines and on a good old, 7 megahertz Amiga bus, be able to process this 384 baud information coming in and have it respond very quickly to be able to turn around and on a frame-by-frame video basis, have it processed by AREX, which is an interpreted language, so there's more lag there. Anyway, make it all work. He wrote a little program called CRX, and it was the doorway to me just being able to control videotape machines and be able to have people create lists of time code numbers from their footage and have the flyer only capture those parts that they were actually going to use and just save disk space and go for that. So it automated the input process. And I think I sold a couple hundred copies of it before it was done. We tried to expand it with a couple other serial control devices so you could actually, he made a serial box for me, Mark did, that would actually switch between the multiple machines off one serial port just by changing a couple flags in the serial output. So you could redirect to several machines, but I never got quite as far as making that an actual video editing system in itself.
So if you had one memory that stood out from your days of working with, being around Amigas, what would that be?
Just the whole experience was just very rewarding for me. I mean, there's so many. I got to meet so many great people and so many brilliant people, inventive people, creative people, and in that from the Amiga. I mean, it just. So yeah, I mean, it's the overall experience. I mean, it's no differentiating moment or memory that's any stronger than any other. I guess overall in the experience, my opportunity to be a instructor at the Atlanta College of Art was definitely the most rewarding hat I've gotten to wear as a freelancer, as a computer person, and being able to share what I knew with these fairly novice people and really open them up to a whole new creative world. That was really the best part of that whole time, is being able to give back and to share and expand people's horizons.
Okay. Thank you for your time, Aaron. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
I would like to thank Aaron for both his time and his insights. It felt like gaining access to a little forgotten pocket of computing history. Also, Videoscape 3D and Aegis Modeler 3D were precursors to Lightwave. Computer Chronicles also ended in 2002, so I was close. Anyway, overall, I would say that Aaron spoke volumes about the idea of creative computing, which, having spoken to some of the original developers of the Amiga computer, was very much on their mind, growing the use of computers beyond what Howard Rheingold has called the cathedrals of mainframes and things like that, where, it's very much an industrial tool to putting computers into the hands of artists and anybody that just wants to do anything creative with a computer. The Remotely Interested podcast is listener supported. If you would like to advertise on the show, contact me at contact@remotely-interested.com. Also, why not spread the word on social media? Facebook, Twitter, whatever you want to do, make people aware of the podcast.